Hello everyone, I'm Shunan from Tea Drunk.
And I'm Cynthia from Tea Drunk as well. Hello.
So today we're going to taste two red teas side by side. They're from the same location, made by the same tea maker, but have very different tasting profiles. So we're gonna try to assess why. Now we have one tea that's called 大吃干 and another one called 小吃干. 吃干 means red and sweet. 大 means big. And xiao means small. So I guess you can guess that these two teas come from different maturity level of the tea leaves, so they're picked at different times.
I'm excited. Let's do it.
So I would open up the tea by cutting them round around the top. Putting the dachigan over here. So you want to prepare very hot water. I would recommend boiling water if possible. We are using 110 milliliter gaiwan to brew these teas. These are the most standard size of gaiwans from China, and the weight of tea that goes in there is 5 grams. All right.
So when we brew in this Gongfu style, typically when you're brewing at home, you're gonna ditch the first brew, but because we're tasting it for evaluation, we're gonna keep the first brew and have them.
Would you like to smell the lid?
I would.
Yeah, it's always recommended to smell the lid of the gaiwan when you first brew the tea. Thank you. It's very sweet.
Very sweet.
And it's because the lid contains very important information about the tea. You can also smell the liqueur or the wet leaves, but it's not going to be as accurate as the actual lid.
Oh.
Yeah, so even from the aroma, there's a little difference,
Yeah.
right?
This one I feel like the smell is a little bit brighter and sweeter.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for sure. And the other one's a little bit earthier, right?
You can also tell, I don't know if you can't really see it on the camera, but the size of the leaves at this point are very different as well.
Exactly.
These leaves are definitely larger and like a little bit more opened, whereas these ones are a little bit more stringy and thin.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. All right, shall we?
Yeah.
All right. So I would highly recommend you slurp the tea when drinking. Not only cools the temperature down, it also helps to open up the tea's flavor as well.
Kind of think about it like wine tasting as well. Similarly, you would slurp your wine, let it aerate a little bit. It's the same thing with tea.
All right. Wow, sweet and woodsy.
Oh my god, it's so comforting.
Yes. Wow. So the Xiao Chi Gan feels a little bit more concentrated. I think it's a little bit more tender too. Has a bigger body.
Yeah, I feel this one deeper in my throat than this one.
Yep. Yeah. All right. Now we're going to discard this brew, and then I'm gonna make the actual brew of the tea. So by the way, red tea is what in the West people will call black tea. However, in China we do have another category of tea already called black tea, so obviously we can't call this one a black tea. So by definition, it's a fully fermented tea where you utilize all the enzymes in tea. So it's actually the sweetest category of tea. If you have a red tea that tastes very astringent and bitter, it's usually because it's not made very well. So think about the really bad like English breakfast or some that you have tasted. It shouldn't be that astringent. And when it's made right, it's naturally the sweetest.
This is a completely different tea than any form of like English style breakfast or any black tea I've ever had.
Yep. Alright, so now with the actual first brew, the tea has opened up more and it's gonna give us so much more flavor. So Gongfu brew calls for a quick flash brew of the tea, especially if you're using a full brew amount of the tea, so full 5 grams instead of like 3 grams and things like that.
Shunan, can you talk a little bit about where this tea comes from? Because I know that from what I remember, it's a very cold climate, right?
Yes, exactly. So these two teas come from the most exclusive tea region in China called Tong Mu. You have to get police clearance to go in there. There are checkpoints. and it's completely off the limit to foreigners. So Cynthia,
wow.
you would not be able to go.
Can't
It's been a protected natural reserve since the 70s because it's home to many endangered species of animals and plants. It is one of the world's coldest tea region because not only it's very high in elevation, over 1,000 meters above sea level, but also it's actually quite in the north in comparison to some of the other tea regions. It's in the northern Fujian province. Yeah.
So what is cold? Like what temperature range? How cold does it get there? I guess when these teas are picked, especially.
Well, here's the thing. So tea picking time, during tea picking time, the temperatures usually are very comparable across all regions.
Okay.
It just means the season will come in much later.
Change.
Exactly.
So the day change, the temperature doesn't change.
Right. So the warmer tea region, the harvesting time can be as early as in early March. Sometimes it's even by Chinese New Year time, which oftentimes happen in January and February each year. So that's really, really early, and that's the warmer tea region. For the colder tea region, the harvesting time will be very heavily placed in April. So when we harvest towards the later part of April, that's when it's considered cold region because spring comes that late. Yeah.
So when were these two? Because I know the difference is their maturity. So when was the earlier one picked and the later one picked?
Right. So the early one were picked towards the second half of April, and then the later one were picked end of April and beginning of May.
Beginning of May.
Right. All right. So now let's have a sip. So the first one we're trying is the Xiao Chi Gan. I would say this woodsy note is definitely very pronounced. What do you think?
Yeah, it's definitely very woodsy. I feel like it also just feels very even across my palate.
Yes.
Like it doesn't have too much. I don't feel the zing anywhere too prominently. It's like a very balanced, even.
Right. Yeah, and that's usually a sign of tea that comes from a very cold location. It has a more even temperament.
Oh, wow. Really?
Yes, but it lasts really long. Cool. It's almost like it's not in your face. It's not heavy.
Yeah,
but yet it's very constant.
But it's also not light.
Exactly. It's not light either. It's not
heavy, but it's not light.
Right. It has almost like a tranquility quality to it. Yeah. And Xiao Chi Gan is the one that picked earlier because it's from, that's why it's called Xiao Chi Gan, because the leaves are still a little bit smaller. And both of these teas actually come from very old tea trees. They're the heirloom tea trees of the region. Most of them are either close to 100 years old or a little bit over 100 years old. So every single tea tree is different in the region. The name of the cultivar or the collective group of cultivar is called Xiaozhong. What do you think about Xiao Chi Gan?
This one I find to be like, this is not a professional word by any means, but like happier, like it's like a, I don't know, like a little perkier.
I get it. Yeah. Yeah, it's not as calm as the Xiao Chi Gan.
Like this one's very like across your whole mouth. It's like very balanced. It's like very even toned, and then this one's definitely got, and I think it's part of the sweetness to it is why it's like maybe a little bit perkier. Right.
Yeah. Totally, and also a lot of the compounds is a little bit more concentrated as well. There's also a sense of umami in there, so that umami makes it more rising as well. So a good, interesting note on these two is that like I mentioned earlier, it's from the same tea region by the same tea maker. However, the reason that they taste so differently is because that they come from different picking time of the leaves. But oftentimes people will think it's just the picking time that makes a difference, but you have to consider all the consequences that comes with that.
Time changes a lot of things.
Exactly. So even though it's the picking time, but that also means the condition during the making of these two teas have changed so much. Right. When you pick the tea later, the weather usually is warmer. The moisture level in the air is very different, and the tea maker had to adapt different methods in making them as well.
Is there typically, and I know every year is different, but is there kind of like a traditional way of thinking that one, like an earlier pick is better, or is like quality changed related to time, or does that not make a difference?
It kind of really depends on the teas, right? So for each tea, there's a standard picking grade. Oftentimes people confuse the standard picking grade with the earlier the picking, the better.
Okay.
So let's say if the standard picking grade is a bud in one leaf, then if you pick a bud which is 1 degree too young in comparison to the standard picking grade, or if you pick a bud in 2 leaves, which is also 1 degree too mature in comparison to the standard picking grade, they're actually equally bad because they're both 1 degree deviating from the standard picking grade. Given that Da Chi Gan and Xiao Chi Gan are actually 2 different teas, so depends on the years and the quality that comes out. So they do call for different standard picking grades. So sometimes but usually you do get better tea as an overall result with the younger picking grade, but that doesn't mean it's always the case. So for this particular vintage, they're actually of the equal quality, but some vintages it might vary a little bit. So after we pick Da Chi Gan, we actually pick another red tea called Xiao, which bears the name of the heirloom. So it's even more mature, but usually it's actually more expensive than either Da Chi Gan or Xiao Chi Gan because they're much more complicated to actually make. So just to showcase that picking grade is important, but it's also more important to know what the standard picking grade is. And as long as you have the standard picking grade and you have all the making steps that follow up with the standard picking grade, and then there's not really an inequality difference. Definitely not as important as locations or terroir. So these 2 teas are very, very popular in China, and there are many that doesn't come from this very particular exclusive tea region. And also want to say that we typically do drink red tea with these more open.
These are way wider than the cups that I'm used to.
Exactly, like the wider cups is because the wider cups actually makes everything more like airier and more lively.
So what about red tea? Does it balance out to having the wider, more airy?
Right. Yeah. So typically, this is a little bit more in depth, but we typically
good. We like in depth.
But basically, to assess tea, oftentimes have to know the limitation of each tea. It's very easy to get certain notes of certain type of tea. So it's easy to have a red tea that's heavy and sweet. It's easy to make dark roasted teas bold. It's easy to make green tea more refreshing.
That's kind of why we don't say if something's pleasant. That doesn't necessarily mean that it's like good,
exactly. I mean, after all, I would say, kids will think orange juice is more pleasant than wine, but it doesn't mean it's more, sophisticated. So we're looking for complexity and depth. So for tea, we're looking for the ones that actually break through the limitations. So for red tea, which being heavy is the natural kind of inclination of how the characteristics going to be. So to make it more lively, in a way perkier, but like having higher clarity, so it's not as saturated. That's actually the challenge. It's harder to do. You can do that easier with a more mature picking. So that's why in a way it's less challenging to achieve that with a more mature picking, and it's harder to achieve that with a more tender picking. But location also plays a huge role, and then also the processing. But when we're try to have a pleasant drinking experience, having certain vessels, such as the vessel that's more opened up, it actually helps to bring out the more lively and higher clarity qualities of the tea as well. So it helps to...
So I'm actually going to grab this as well, just to kind of show on screen the difference. So like this is one of our other cups that's kind of the classic... Oh, this is the classic 3-sip cup. This is the middleman, So this is the classic 3-sip cup, and this is the wide difference. So you can kind of really see how different it is. That's something totally new to me that I never knew that we, would make such a difference in the taste of the tea. I think it'd be really fun to have both of these teas in both of these cups.
Right,
to see what the difference would be to have them. That's kind of cool.
All right, we'll save that for the next time.
There's so many really fun ways to be able to have teas that are from the same regions but different makers, or like this where they're from the same maker but picked at different times. Like there's so many ways to kind of taste through teas in a really fun, educational, nerdy way, using different cups, using different teapots to brew with, and this has been a lot of fun for me and something that I enjoy doing at home. So we kind of recommend, if you guys are interested as well, to buy things that are of comparison to be able to taste at home and play around with friends and experiment with your taste buds. And
Yes,
yeah.
for sure. Oftentimes with contrast, that's how you know the differences of different teas. And it's only come with lots of drinking that you get experience
Yes.
drinking tea.
Yeah. Well, thanks for watching, guys.